Hello again, Struck. Today I'm bringing you another build video for Warhammer Chaosbane, and this one is for the engineer class Keela Gunnarsdottir. It's another rework of an old build of mine for her, and this one is Mortar Scrapper 2.0. A decent build with the Powder Heir set, which gives you the Heroic Mortar build, and it also relies on picking up scrap from the ground to get a little bit of extra cooldown reduction procs and some good damage stacking and other goodies. So overall it's a fun setup, and I've played it with 3 different hammers. You're seeing some footage with the rock splitter, later you're gonna see something with the stone breaker, and eventually at the end, when I'm showing more gameplay, there's gonna be a single Tower of Chaos for run with the 3rd hammer I experimented with, which is recommended for speedrunning lower difficulties, the Forge Heart. All of the footage is on Chaos 9, just so I can keep it in line with some of my other builds where I'm showing Chaos 9. It's fun build, it's definitely strong, it definitely can have a lot of burst potential if you do a good rotation, and if you prefer to play it more safe, more tanky, you can use that melee rock splitter hammer and do more melee attacks. If you wanna play it more spammy with the mortar, you can try and run around and collect those scraps and keep reducing your cooldown so you can keep spamming it. It's actually pretty strong compared to before. I don't remember this being this strong last time with the Mortar Scrapper, the first version of that build. So I guess the change in the God Skill 3 definitely helped that build. Keep in mind, in the God Skill segment that you're gonna see in a moment, I did a small change, and I did that throughout that segment. So the skill points in the God skill points that I've been using were the ones you see at the beginning of the God skill segment, but later on you see me switching 2 points out to get that extra 8% more damage versus champions. So I hope you would all enjoy this build. Now let's go to the God skill segment. The God skill 3 I suggest looks like this. So we're grabbing Move Mountains and we're stopping. Then on this side we're grabbing Engineer of War Mastered, and we're getting another 5% cooldown reduction. And then on this way we're grabbing some nice amounts of damage to champions. Damage, crit damage, crit damage, cost reduction, crit damage. On this side we're grabbing some damage, bonus damage to champions again, max HP, damage, and we're grabbing other things like damage, crit damage, cost reduction damage, crit damage, and bonus damage to champions. So you can see we've got 24% bonus damage to champions. There's more options to get bonus damage to champions if you want it around here. So 2 points that you can sacrifice to get that bonus damage to champions would probably be those 2 points. Actually, I suggest you do this. So in the screenshot I'm gonna include this version. Less HP but more damage to champions, and that's 32% bonus damage to champs. I think you can't go wrong with something like that. Seems like a pretty solid setup to me. It has everything you might need. I mean, just look at that 32% bonus damage to champions, 33 regular bonus damage, and then a little bit of cooldown and 20% cooldown reduction. That should be clear enough. So stick to this setup and you should be fine. Keep experimenting if you want. Let me know what setup you're using and why you're using it. Even if you don't tell me why, I can probably try and figure it out. So let's move on to the next segment. The skills for this build are probably very similar to some of my other builds, and maybe similar to the previous version of the Mortar Scrapper setup. I kind of have a few suggestions for when you want to be speedrunning, but let's go throughout all the skills. First of all, bread and butter of the build, Mortar Heroic. Then this one, I like heavy pounding because it does decent damage. You might wanna use excavation, it also does decent damage as a fewer. And you might wanna even consider adding other things that use use energy or generate energy. This is just a fewer damage dealer skill while you're collecting scrap and mortar is cooling down. So experiment, make the build your own. I'm keeping it similar to the previous one just because I wanna keep it as close as possible. So we're gonna be using heavy pounding, but you can experiment. Move mountains like before, we're using that, but instead of using the superior engineer of 4, we're now using mastered, which gives us fire damage, and it also gives us armor piercing and some healing. It's okay, it's decent, it's of course better than the other one, but here's the thing, I'm using explosive rush basic. And I'm using makeshift automaton superior. Superior, probably I shouldn't say why I'm not using the other one. This is the one with the explosives. The other one, this is with the fire, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, this is the one that just shoots bullets, so that synergizes well with the build. So here's some things you might want to change. First, alternating pistons. You might want to go superior if you want that healing. If you want to have more cooldown reduction, which I prefer myself, go for mastered. Duelist chain reaction must have. Upgraded automaton superior. Why superior, not mastered? Well, because this gives us a damage reduction while we are next to the turret, which I think we need, especially with the way I've been playing now without a granite ring, to get more damage, because the burstiness of the mortar skill is amazing. So if you can play it a little bit less tanky and more glass cannony, you can get a lot of damage. And since we are not gonna be doing damage through the turrets, it's good to have that damage reduction to make up for some of the damage reduction we lost from the granite ring, to get that extra damage. So Hero of the Desert is optional. If you don't have the Tomb King's DLC, you can get Powder Armor, or when you're speedrunning, I suggest in this SWAT Scout Chain Reaction. You can even try using Scout Chain Reaction without speedrunning on hard difficulties, but another thing you can use is one of the potions, like an HP potion increase, or the damage increase potion. That's also gonna be amazing. Even the cooldown potion, although I wouldn't suggest that, the damage reduction potion would also work, so I'd say one of those 4 potions is a good choice. Then you can also use a Collector's Guild skill, and you can also use a passive. A passive like Gelatinous Punch, which increases the fire damage. And damage from burning enemies reduced, because you're gonna be burning the enemies. With this shit you're gonna be burning the enemies and you're gonna be doing fire damage, but the main damage of that skill is physical, so keep that in mind. But there are things that do fire damage in the setup that you can kind of exploit with Gelatinous Punch, so that's just an option, keep it in mind. This one I wouldn't suggest. Mechanical hits, again, if you're not focusing that much on the melee, avoid it. So something you could upgrade is the Radiator. If you want to be focusing on this explosion, you can try and get Mastered Radiator, but that means downgrading alternating pistons and removing Hero of the Desert. So the thing that you might have to do is that 7 points. Downgrading alternating pistons, boom, 11 points. And that gives you 8 points to upgrade this. And 3 points to use something for speedrunning. That's the setup actually I used on the other day for speedrunning. This is it. This is your speedrunning Chaos 7 setup. Movement speed, a little healing here, and increased explosion and overheating and so on. So this is the speedrunning setup. You're gonna be able to see screenshots of both setups on my website. And the link should be in the description and the comment section. And I think that pretty much is it for those active skills. Again, this one is kind of interchangeable, so pick whatever you like there. Quickly about the legendary ranks, this is what I used. Legendary Rage would be a good synergy if it actually worked. This skill right now hasn't been confirmed to work. I tested it a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, it still wasn't working. I didn't test it today, so I can't tell you if it works. If you're a new player, I suggest starting off with Legendary Reinforcement. get that 200 power and like 30% chance or so. Eventually, if you have like 2, 3, 400, start investing into endurance or into punishment if you want damage. And once you have reinforcement, endurance, punishment, you can go into crushing. If you don't need the damage and want more damage reduction, get those 3 if you have enough points. But eventually you would have enough points for all 4 of those, even maybe the healing eventually when you're like 1000. Because the cap is like 200, 100 power, 100 power, 100 power, 100 power on each. This one is the only one that can go for more power, but it's not working, so kind of that's how it is. So for the gear, first of all I like to mention that we are using obviously the Mortar Heroic set Powder Carrier, the Powder Heir, which gives us 100% extra damage to all explosives, and being hit by an enemy has a chance to drop a bomb. That's the Heroic Mortar, pretty solid, pretty good bursty skill. For the hammers, I experimented with 3 different hammers. One was the Rock Splitter, and it's good, very good when you're trying to get that extra damage reduction and when you're using heavy pounding or another melee skill more often, rather than just running around collecting scrap and spamming mortar. Another option would be the Forge Heart, especially for speedrunning. This is my preferred option when speedrunning, and you would see in the skill segment and on my website that I've got 2 different skill setups for the speedrunning, where the god skills remain the same for each setup. And then another one I tried was the Stonebreaker, but mind you, this one didn't have enough HP, but I had another one that had HP but didn't have the health drain, so I used the one with the health drain instead of the one with the HP. Ideally, instead of counter-attack damage here on this one, I would have HP, and that would be the perfect stat rows. So more about rows in a moment. Stonebreaker is good because it works for either the speedrunning or the non-speedrunning setup if you're focusing more on the mortar rather than meleeing, and if you don't think you need that damage reduction from the Rock Splitter, the Stonebreaker is a very good, decent choice of a weapon. So keep in mind, this is kind of based on overheating levels, so it works a little weird, but it's nice. Now, for the amulet, you would want the Mountain Pendant for that cooldown. Ideally, if you don't have it, maybe you can try and find something else, like Flint Pendant won't be bad if you try to stay away from the enemies. And with Mortar it's actually doable, so that extra damage would be super good synergy. Pendant of Taunting, if you're farming and speedrunning, is not a bad choice. And then Pendant of the Rebel, I'm not sure whether you want it unless you have a specific potion skill, something that gives you movement speed or something like damage when you use the potion, then you might want to use this one. And God skills do more damage. I wouldn't suggest this, but if you don't have anything better wrote, maybe use it. I mean, it's optional. For the rings, you would ideally use a Siegebreaker, a good road Siegebreaker and a good road Fiery Ring of Thori. I didn't have a Fiery Ring of Thori, I was using Insulation, which is okay, it's fine. I wanted to just experiment not using Granite Ring for this build and go a little bit more Glass Cannon-ish, so instead of having the damage reduction and extra HP for the price of 40% damage, I decided to go for something that is not Granite. The best choice, the best in slot would be Fiery Ring of Thori along with the Siegebreaker to spam more mortars, but Insulation is not that bad of a choice. Ancestor probably not that great of a choice, but if you decide to swap heavy pounding for excavation, then you can probably use that ring that gives you 50% damage reduction as long as you have energy. So you get your energy drained every time you get hit. But you get that 50% damage reduction as long as you have energy, so that's another ring you could consider. There's also other choices like a few other things you can draw. I don't have them right now, but there are options like the Gromreel, for example, for damage reduction, but again I think this one is better played as a glass cannon rather than a face tank setup. So that kind of is it for the suggested items. Let's go through the rows quickly. First, on the set items, the only thing with cooldown reduction is the helmet, so that's priority number 1. Priority number 2, HP. Number 3, armor. The rest is fillers. Then the powder carrier, cuirass and tassets apply to kind of in the same category. So priority number 1 for both of those is HP, number 2 is armor, the rest is fillers. For the boot, number 1 is HP, number 2 is armor, number 3 is movement speed, because that's the only item that can give you movement speed. And for the gauntlets, that's the only item that can give you flat damage, damage over time and crit damage. I'm not sure how good damage over time would be for this setup, as the major damage from mortar is actually the physical, the regular damage, not the fire, but it might help. I would still suggest prioritizing damage first, then second probably HP or crit damage, kind of tight for the second place, depending whether you need more HP for your setup, whether you need more damage. And then armor as the third priority. And after that, I guess it could be fillers. It could be damage over time, maybe at the top of the filler list. It's entirely up to you. So for the pendant, you can get armor, but it shouldn't be that high of a priority. Priority number 1 for the pendant and both rings is crit chance and cooldown reduction. Either of those is equally important. For this build, probably even cooldown reduction is more important than crit chance, probably. I would say they're equally important, but if you want to be more spammy, sacrifice crit chance if you can get one that has both. For example, let's say you have one with crit chance and one with cooldown and you're trying to make a choice which one to take. If you want to be more spammy, take the cooldown. If you don't want to be more spammy but rather have more crits, of course, take the crit chance. Priority number 2, I would say it's a tie for damage and HP, flat damage and HP. Priority number 3 probably would be things like crit damage, health drain, and armor maybe for the pendant. Some of those good fillers that are actually worth taking. So ideally you would have cooldown reduction, crit chance, flat damage, HP and health drain, for example. I would love those 5 stats. Or crit chance instead of the crit damage instead of the health drain. So that sums it up for those. Now let's talk about the pistol and the hammer. Pistols get crit chance, hammers don't. So on pistols, crit chance and cooldown reduction are the high priority. Second priority would be damage and HP. Crit damage shouldn't be that high on the priority list for a pistol, but it's nice to have it. Health drain is definitely nice. Damage over time shouldn't be that high on the priority list. So ideally you would have something like crit chance, cooldown reduction, flat damage, HP, and then we need 2 more, which I would prefer probably to be health drain and armor piercing, or health drain and crit damage. On this one, the crit damage you can get is much higher than on a pistol. So hammers go to up to 80 something crit damage, but they don't give you crit chance. So the crit damage on those might be a little bit higher on the priority list, but priority number 1 on a hammer would be cooldown reduction together with something like let's say flat damage. Flat damage and cooldown reduction are priority number 1. Priority number 2 would be crit damage and HP. And then armor piercing, health drain are good fillers. So ideally you would have something that looks like cooldown reduction, flat HP, flat damage, health drain, crit damage and maybe armor piercing. So this hammer that you're seeing right here, instead of counter attack damage, if it had HP it would have been perfect roll. Pretty nice, honestly. So I think that pretty much sums up the rows that you want on every item. Quickly for the blessings, I'm suggesting a balanced green red green setup with 3 green and 3 red, which should be linked in between. So this gives you 6000 HP max, you can get 4060 damage. If you want 420 more damage, you're doing something like this. This gives you 2000 less HP, so up to 4000, but 420 more damage. But if you want a setup that gives you more HP but less damage, you're getting up to 2000 more HP, but 420 less damage than the balanced setup. So up to 80,000 HP, 3640 damage. This is fine, this is nice. And it works well, There's a speed farming setup that you might want to experiment with for crit chance, crit damage, and flat damage, which probably would be best if you do it like that, for more flat damage. So that's the flat damage you get, that's the crit damage, and that's the 2% crit chance. The crit chance cannot be increased. You can only get more crit damage and less damage if you do something like this, for example on both sides. But I would suggest go for 4 red and 2 yellow linked if you want to be going for the farming, speedrunning, wood quality setup with a pendant of taunting. That's pretty much it. Hope it was useful, helpful. Next you're gonna see some more gameplay footage of the build. And here we are at the segment where I show you a little bit more gameplay and maybe talk a bit about how I rotate my skills. In fact, when it comes to rotation of the skills for this build, it's not that difficult. It's mostly spamming turrets to keep that duelist chain reaction up, using your god skills to get that extra damage reduction from both of them, and to get the Engineer Force armor piercing, and also to get that healing every now and then. Dodge with that charging skill, or just use it for mobility, and just spam that mortar. You're seeing some Stonebreaker footage, but in a moment there's gonna be the Forge Heart. So spam the mortar, and if you wanna be spamming it more and more, just collect those scraps. So you might wanna do a little bit of kiting and collecting for a second or two, and then again quickly spam the mortar. So now this is the Forge Heart footage. You can see this is something I would recommend for speedrunning something like Chaos 7 upgraded relic hunts, because of that fiery aura, and with that you might want to consider upgrading that one passive that lets you get more damage with the explosion after overheating. So overall there wasn't such a huge difference between the Stonebreaker, the Forge Heart or the Rock Splitter. So any hammer would be good as long as you have good rolls on it. So the rotation again, you can see I'm trying to sometimes collect more scrap, but sometimes I get bored and I just go full on melee mode near my turrets. Here's another boss fight in a moment, first some elites before it. So this is now with the Rock Splitter. Rock Splitter is probably the hammer I use for most of the builds, except for the turret build where I use the Cocktooth, and I don't suggest using the turret hammer. It just doesn't fit as well with this build. You're not gonna be focusing on damage with the turrets, so I think the one hammer you don't wanna use would be the Cocktooth. Overall, you can do some interesting synergies with trying to stun the enemies, maybe replacing some of the skills to get that melee chance to stun, but I don't personally like it. And you can see it's so bursty, so much damage you can get if you get the enemy inside the corroder circle and get that mortar to hit them. It's kind of a one skill and then it's a kill. Pretty cool, pretty fun. Now let's see that boss fight I was telling you about. Again, I'm not the best at playing the builds I make, I always kind of try to say this, so someone else might have already have killed that enemy by now with 2 quick bursts and collecting scrap, but it didn't take too long. I think I only used mortar 3 times before this enemy died. Actually I had to use it a 4th time, because look at how little HP he had left after the 3rd mortar. I really enjoyed the build and I hope you enjoyed as much as I do. It really ended up being stronger with the god skill rebalance from the last patch. If you wanna get notified for more content about this game or others like it, or various different types of RPGs, ARPGs, tactical RPGs, all sorts of RPGs, or other types of wooters, You could subscribe to my channel, get that bell button clicked to not miss those notifications. Thanks again for watching the video, folks. Keep it cool, and until next time, goodbye.